Welcome to another episode of the Historical Movies Podcast, a podcast all about movies inspired by history. I'm Ross Evans, I'm an editor, and I'm joined by Professor of Modern History at Liverpool Hope University and historical scriptwriter, Bryce Evans. Bryce, Ave.
Ave, how are you doing?
Very well, because in this episode, to coincide with the release of Gladiator 2 later this week, we're taking you back to the year 2000 and... I'm Maximus Decimus Meridius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. It's Gladiator. Are you not entertained? Oh, well, Bryce, I was very entertained. This is a sword and sandals movie brought into the modern age, I would say. Not just people lounging around in togas, eating grapes, but revitalized, reinvented the historical epic has our good friend Ridley Scott. He's made it a more gritty, more action-orientated, and a more entertaining popcorn movie. And I think we've been living with historical epics in that vein ever since this wonderful movie was made back in the year 2000. And I think it's probably the film that Ridley Scott has been trying to, for many years, remake with things like Kingdom of Heaven, Robin Hood, Exodus, Gods and Kings. I think they've all been trying to relive this kind of magic moment in filmmaking that produced this this wonderful film. What did you think of the original Gladiator?
I must confess, I think this movie is one of the most overhyped movies of all time.
Sacrilege.
I never liked it when it came out. Having revisited it this afternoon, I still don't like it. Ridley made his name originally making perfume commercials, which I personally love. Your Christmas aftershave commercials. But this could be, I think it's such a poor movie, it could be an aftershave commercial. Gladiator for men, the masculine scent. It's almost like the Roman blockbuster revived as a prolonged aftershave ad. I find revenge movies terribly, terribly, terribly boring. And I just felt the whole thing... Do you know what the whole thing... Watching the whole thing reminded me of when you have a really bad day at work and stuff keeps coming across your desk which is just really boring and annoying. And all you want to do is just go home. And I just thought of Maximus just wanting to go to his comely wife and his herb garden. You know, when you're having a really bad day at work, you think, I just want to get home. And I just wanted to get through this movie. I'll be honest. I really do not like this movie. And I'll elaborate on that. There's many reasons why I don't like this movie.
Hopefully, because I love this movie. I think it's a brilliant movie. You mentioned at heart this is a revenge movie. And that is, I hope Quentin Tarantino's not listening to this, because revenge movies, I think like you, I really find that like a fairly weak premise for a movie. It's just not my thing. I mean, I'm always a bit bored by the revenge motive in movies. I have to say, with the exception of this movie, because I found the revenge motive in this, for some reason I'm not really too sure of, absolutely fascinating and brilliant. I think my joy at this movie comes from the fact that it's a historical movie set in the Roman world. And we know that Ridley Scott, because we've done Napoleon as the very first episode of this podcast, he's not that bothered about historical accuracy if it gets in the way of drama. Yeah. But I think for all of the historical inaccuracies of this film, and we will come onto the history later, I think it actually gives really quite a good little vignette into ancient Rome, into the... there's this scene I always think of with Oliver Reed, somewhere towards the end, and he's drinking something that looks like a bit like a mojito. It looks like a glass with like mint leaves or something. And there's a guy dressed up as a pharaoh juggling just in the background. And you see all this sort of cosmopolitan stuff in ancient Rome. And I think that these are actually great little... It's actually really well done. Like, it actually gives you a good idea, I think, of what ancient Rome probably was like. Plus, you've got all the political infighting, which is not historically accurate in this film, but inspired by historical stuff, which we'll come on to. And I think, actually, it's more than just a revenge movie, because it gives such a good little... view of the ancient Roman world. If you consider that in ancient Rome, they would have had I think they even made their own ice cream. They imported like ice from the Alps. They had silk from China, 8,000 miles away, incense from Arabia, ivory, spices from India. It was a complete cosmopolitan mixing pot, and quite an incredible time and place to be alive in the ancient world, I think. So for those reasons, and the fact I think this is a great action movie, I'm a big fan.
Well, I suppose in terms of its political message, it's, there's a lot of inaccuracies here, but broadly speaking, I suppose I'd agree with you in the sense that it portrays the tension between, Caesarism and republicanism. It's accurate. It's actually really inaccurate, the whole movie, isn't it? I did hear that the historical consultant demanded that his name be taken off this movie. Although it's accurate to the extent, I suppose, broadly what you're saying, in the extent that Richard Harris's character, Marcus Aurelius, he's a goodie, isn't he? He's a thinker, he's a stoic. I was listening to his meditations actually this week. He's also, of course, a violent warmonger. There's obviously no evidence he was ever a Republican, which he turns to at the end here.
Yeah.
But, he is this sort of philosopher king in the Platonic sense. Commodus, by contrast, was tyrannical and arbitrary in his rule. And I suppose I'd agree with you in the sense that, it captures the cultural vitality, the trade of the Roman world, the sort of exchange, but also that sort of central political tension. Albeit, in a highly inaccurate manner. But I suppose it gets at that, idea of Caesarism versus republicanism. And that's the best thing I'll say for this movie. So, brace yourself, because that's probably the best... Well, actually, I have to say, you mentioned Oliver Reed, and I think we should have an entire segment devoted to Oliver Reed. Also, I was wondering if we could have a segment, probably like a regular segment, perhaps on this podcast, which could become a sort of regular and much loved segment called Mel Gibson was originally offered the lead role.
Yes.
Segment, because of, once again, Mel's never far from our thoughts. And
exactly, the 90s, early 2000s, he was basically offered every movie. Yeah, absolutely. I found that little stat and I was very, very happy to see our pal Mel has come up again. Well, that brings me on neatly to some of the history that is mentioned in this movie, because it's set in 180 AD. And this was a period just before we had as they're known, the 5 good emperors of the Roman Empire, just before we get from Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius, and then we get Marcus Aurelius. I've actually got listeners won't be able to see, but I'm using a Roman emperor's mouse mat here, so I've got that to hand.
Levels of nerdiness off the scale right now, listeners. Yes.
But so this is the point that coming into this period, the supposedly 5 good emperors, then Commodus takes over and everything just goes to is the kind of great narrative that we're taught about the Roman Empire at this stage. It's interesting as well, you mentioned in this movie that actually I read that Commodus was the only time in the Roman Empire, I find this fascinating if it's true, that the basically heir to the throne was given power and everything went swimmingly at the handover. There were no civil wars, there were no uprisings, nothing. Now, it wasn't always... emperors weren't always given power from their father. It was a much more complicated system than that. I think, actually, it's probably the exception, not the rule. But in this movie, it's actually the complete opposite. Ridley Scott's done a classic Ridley Scott. It was in ancient Rome of this period, it was very clear that Commodus was going to become the next emperor. And Ridley Scott has sort of injected his character, Russell Crowe, into this to save it.
Ridley has him killing his dad. I suppose, very broadly, and again, we don't really get too hung up on pedantically hung up on inaccuracies, but I suppose you could look at Maximus's refusal to his sort of virtuous refusal to assume power, that sort of caretaker manager role, as to bring in the football analogies. That's Cincinnatus, isn't it? The Roman general Cincinnatus. Who and of course for the character himself, of Maximus Decimus Meridius. I'm going to call him MDM from now on. Is that okay? So
yeah.
for MDM,
it's a lot easier. Yeah.
You've got the original inspiration. I think in the original script, he's written, and they changed the script. He's actually Narcissus, who is the wrestler who actually eventually killed Commodus, the Emperor Commodus. Yeah. And of course, there's shades of Spartacus in here. So I suppose in terms of ingredients, there's lots of accurate stuff. It's just it's jumbled together.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned, I think, Mel Gibson, we've done a few of his movies, and we mentioned that he uses history as his playground, and that's exactly what Ridley Scott has done in this movie. And if you can get over the fact that it's got some horrific historical inaccuracies in it, and just think about perhaps its vision of ancient Rome and the complexities of the civic and social space and all that kind of stuff, it actually gives, I think, a relatively good image of that. I agree with you up to a point that I found Joaquin Phoenix, he goes a bit too crazy at the end of this movie. You know when he goes like full-blown bastard and he's like, his sister, if you look at me the wrong way, I'm going to kill your son, my nephew. I want 1,000 years rule of my heirs, my successors. I mean, the real Commodus, so I read, was absolutely balmy. He thought he was descended from Hercules. He renamed Rome to Colonia Commodiana, colony of Commodus. He basically lived a party lifestyle when he became an emperor. No interest in governing, and just lived in the palace having feasts with 300 concubines, according to historical writers. Of course, one thing I should mention, in ancient Rome, you always have to be careful. Of course, you'll know this, Bryce, that who's writing the history, because there's so much political intrigue in ancient Rome that you've got to be careful about the sources that you're reading and whether you believe them fully or not.
Well, come to Joachim as Commodus. I mean, one of the things I do like about it, I suppose what I like more about this movie is the myths around this film, and I think it's important in that sense that we get onto Oliver Reed later on. But apparently, Joaquin Phoenix is drunk in most of those early scenes. So nervous was he that Harris instructed Russell Crowe to get him drunk. And
I imagine not that Russell Crowe needed much instructing to start drinking at 9 a.m. or whatever.
Well, I like the boozy myths, and again, that's why we're waiting, of course, for the Oliver Reed segment to come in. But okay, let me take a highly revisionist take on this. Is Commodus actually the baddie in this movie? To stick with me here. Okay, he's a bit incesty. He's a bit, sort of panda-eyed and spiteful. But under Commodus, he institutes 150 days of games. Now think about that. The World Cup lasts 30 days. That's five back-to-back World Cups, right?
Absolutely.
That Commodus brings in. Also, is Maximus Decimus Meridius, MDM, is he actually the goodie? Is he the goodie of this movie? He kills his horse by riding it, thrashing it all the way from Germany to Italy in like a day. I mean, if he was an excessive, if he was a jockey, that would be excessive use of the whip for sure. If I could get him a bit, if I could just put one toe into Sood's corner, Jennifer Barker in Literature Film Quarterly writes, Maximus is a fascist, the sort of hypermasculine, blood and soil deliverer, beloved of fascists. Emily Albu, similarly writing in Zarathustra Journal, says that at its time when this was received in America, the film's popularity coincides with the US election of 2000. Maximus is identified by some voters as George W. Bush, delivering America from the liberal sleaze of Bill Clinton.
The hell can you... What?
Arthur J... well, let's be honest, these cultural studies academics lay it on a bit bloody thick sometimes, don't they?
Yeah.
But I found one for you here. Arthur J. Pomeroy, writing in a book, and it's an entire book, it's an edited collection devoted to this movie, says it has, quote, fascist overtones. And yeah, there's a lot of, am I allowed to say the word wank in these, maybe you can bleep that out, in these analyses, but I do think that they do hit upon something here in that there is a bit of there is a slight sort of fascism to this movie, and that's perhaps unsurprising, maybe given its subject matter. But I would get to, the point I'm coming around to is the film critic Roger Ebert, who we cite now and again. His sort of,
I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, I am. And his summing up of this movie, I think because of the sort of fascism, frankly, not to be anachronistic, he says it lacks joy, and I agree with him on that. Yeah. I really agree with him on that.
Well, that's a good point. I think about revenge films in general. I find that they lack some element of humanity.
So
I suppose revenge is humanity.
So why would you? I mean, because this, I think, for me, revenge flicks, as I say, I find boring. I'll be honest as well. I find Gladiators boring. I find the
oh my god, Bryce, what are you talking about? They're amazing.
I find the slow motion. Use of slow motion here really, really rubbish, and I find the action scenes dreadfully boring.
Well, I found that I read that if you're talking about the slow motion in the forest at the beginning, I read that it's because they ran out of daylight and they had to shoot with a much faster.
Well, they did shoot it in linear format, didn't they? This movie
chronologically,
yeah. So, weirdly, yeah.
Yeah. No, I find the ancient world. Well, I found ancient Rome absolutely fascinating, particularly Gladiators, which brings me perhaps nicely on to the history of Gladiators. I should mention I did read a quote coming back to your point about Commodus, who is obviously in this film clearly the baddie. I did read a quote from Cassius Dio, who was a contemporary historian, who said that at least at the beginning of his reign, the army and the plebs, the ordinary people, liked him. Commodus. You can imagine why if he's putting on 150
5 World
days
Cups.
of games.
5 World Cups. Just think about that, back to back. What's not to like?
He also fought as a gladiator. Did you read that, Commodus? He had 735 victories because no one was allowed to touch him, basically. No, I find the world of gladiators fascinating, and I've visited many arenas, ancient Roman arenas, and I'm always struck by. It's a bit like when you go into a football stadium. I love walking in and seeing the pitch for the first time, and you get into the atmosphere. You get this cauldron atmosphere inside a football stadium, and you can imagine what that would be like. 50,000 people in the Colosseum, and I think this film's really good, where it shows that kind of atmosphere. I actually thought there's a scene in this where they reenact, in inverted commas, the battle between Hannibal and Scipio. It's about in the middle of the film. It's when I think it's the first fight in the Colosseum, and I realised at that point that this gladiatorial combat is basically wrestling. It's basically wrestling, and this where they're making up stories. Who's going on here?
Wrestling is also crap. There's nothing sadder than to adult men who are still really into wrestling.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of
I'm talking like WWE. That's what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. But it is that spectacle. That's that, and you can imagine live. That's when, unlike wrestling, people are running the risk of dying here. So you can imagine that electricity that you would get in a stadium of 50,000 people. And I think this film does really good in those moments. And it is kind of hammy. The script, I've got to get your opinion on this, because some of the script is eminently quotable. Are you entertained? On my signal, unleash hell, have kind of become quotes from the ages. But at one point, Russell Crowe asks his best mate Cicero, "Do you ever find it hard to do your duty?" His reply: "Sometimes I do what I want. The rest of the time I do what I have to." And I thought, that doesn't mean fucking it. That means nothing. What does that mean? You could see that's like an answer to any question. Yeah. Well, what did you think of the script? Sometimes this script is very patchy. I hear that when they started filming, they only had 34 pages of script or something written. Yeah. And they made a lot of it up.
It went through, by all accounts, I think you need a bit longer to by everything I've heard about this, it was a real mess, wasn't it? It was very bitty, and I think I heard an interview with Russell Crowe, and they're filming in Morocco, and they didn't really have a script to go on. I think Crowe writes bits and pieces. I don't think it's a very strong script. I think it's quotable because of its box office success. Lines like at the start, like in 3 weeks' time, I'll be tending to my herb garden or something. It's just like I think it's really quite. I have to admit, really quite poor in places. But then it's that kind of blockbuster movie where you're not expecting sort of anything too lyrical.
Well, it's popcorn. That's why I like this film. It's a popcorn movie. It's an enjoyable popcorn movie. Yeah. He's redone the tired old epic film Sword and Sandals, Ridley Scott, and he's redone it as a popcorn movie, and that's basically what we've had ever since. When we've gone back to historical epics.
No one had really done ancient Rome since Cleopatra flopped in the early 60s. So he revives it, at a 40 year remove. Fair play to Ridley, for doing that. Interesting, you mentioned the film, the historical epic he's always wanting to make. And you could even include like the sort of more recent, more modern stuff like Napoleon in there as well. I hadn't heard. Had you heard of this movie? Ridley did a movie called 1492: Conquest of Paradise. Have you heard of that?
I've never heard of that. No.
I have to.
When did he do it? What year did it come out?
I don't want to plagiarise. So I heard this on the What Went Wrong podcast, which is about movies. So I hadn't heard this. They say that I think it's early 90s. It's 1492 Conquest of Paradise, starring Jared Depardieu as Columbus.
Maybe quite a good pick.
We have got to watch that. A complete flop, to the extent of no one has heard of it. No one has heard of it. So yeah, it's he's always sort of after his popcorn historical epic. Well, then again, Ridley, we've talked about this before. His back catalogue is quite sort of like eclectic, really, isn't it? I mean, like it's a big sort of big breakthrough with Thelma and Louise. Like a very different sort of movie, really, in a lot of ways. We do often discuss. Probably won't have this segment this week where we say what will be the sequel, because the sequel is coming out very shortly, Gladiator 2. But again, on this, and I have to take my hat off to the What Went Wrong podcast. I didn't know this. They claim, I haven't checked it, but they say that after Gladiator, and get this now, Russell, I hope they're not making this up. I hope it's true. Russell Crowe commissioned the musician Nick Cave, another Antipodean, of course, to write a sequel to Gladiator. And Nick Cave's sequel to Gladiator was set in the afterlife. So Maximus Decimus Meridius is still with us, because obviously the big problem with the sequel is that MDM dies, doesn't he? But don't worry, because Nick Cave has him in the afterlife. But Ross, the afterlife isn't the beautiful Elysian fields with comely wife and the breeze swaying gently across the corn and all the rest and the purple hues. No, the afterlife is hellish, and we have an immortal. MDM is now immortal, and he's hanging out with the gods, and he then has to do battle with the gods. He has to fight big wars against bad gods, but they not just in the afterlife, but they reach into real life, because they go on MDM and the gods fight wars up to and including World War II and Vietnam together.
What the hell? What?
No,
you're kidding me.
I hope this is. I haven't checked it, but if anyone wants to go to the What Went Wrong podcast, which I think is fairly reliable source, I mean, how would they make that? How could anyone? I thought that can't be true, but how could you make that up?
How could you make that up?
How could you make that up?
I thought you were going to say that it's like, a surprise. He actually didn't die at the end. They managed to resuscitate him or something. The paramedics came on, and so he lived again. I've seen in the second one. We should come on to Gladiators.
Oliver Reed.
In a minute, but Gladiators first of all. I find Gladiators fascinating.
All right, go on.
But I noticed in this movie they actually, and I wonder, because it was basically fairly recently found out that they used to flood the Colosseum, flood the whole thing, and fill it with boats, fucking crocodiles. Like, it's ridiculous.
Wow.
So the scenes in the original Gladiator are actually wild, but perhaps you could say not wild enough. But it looks like, from watching the trailer of Gladiator 2, it's absolutely not released since at the moment we're recording this. They do have that at the end of the trailer. They've got like a boat battle. But I was actually looking up. I think one of the things you could say about this movie is that it's all a bit. It portrays gladiator fights as very chaotic and deadly, and they weren't really. There's like different theory. It's obviously very difficult to know how many gladiators died, how frequently gladiators died. But the statistic I always remember is if you were going into the arena as a gladiator, there's probably around a 5% chance that you die in the battle you're in. Some people, I think Mary Beard came up with a study. She said 1 in 5 matches resulted in a death. So, because if you think about it, these people were the footballers of their day. You know, they were. You don't really see it in this movie, but they were pampered. They were given like the best massages, the best food. They were celebrities. They were like sex idols of the Romans. They were like the footballers of their time.
I've heard. I'm not an ancient historian, but I've heard that. But I've also heard at the same time that the Roman public would have regarded them as scumbags.
Oh, okay. That's not what I've read.
Maybe the footballer analogy is a good one, because you sometimes look at these sort of
exactly
rat boys with multiple tattoos and really bad haircuts, yet who are incredibly talented. So maybe that is correct. Can I just are you done with the gladiator reflections? Because
I just want to mention that there's to give the listeners an idea. There's a famous tombstone in Sicily. It's dedicated to a gladiator called Flamma, who died at the age of 30. He recorded that this is a pretty good win ratio for any manager, I think, or team. Recorded that he'd fought in 34 combats, 21 wins, 9 draws, and 4 defeats. So just give you an idea of that it's not always fight to the death, and it's not always, thumb up, thumb down, all that rubbish. It's more complicated than that.
Another inaccuracy with this movie. Can I do a massive segue from your boat battle theme, but also the combat theme there, to come to Oliver Reed?
Please, finally.
So, I mean, what I've said there before, I think what's probably better than this movie is the mythology around this movie. And no greater mythology around this movie than that concerning mahogany-skinned, bumptious, Falstaffian beached whale, 60s Hellraiser Oliver Reed.
Oliver Reed.
Who has been out of the game for well over a decade, living quietly down in County Cork, when he gets the call from Sir Ridley. He I think maybe in his obituary might read he liked to drink. He's on set. According to some accounts, he's actually off the sauce. According to some accounts, not others.
Yeah.
And then one fateful day after filming in Valletta in Malta, Oliver Reed bumps into the crew of HMS Cumberland, who are on shore leave, and sadly dies of a heart attack after drinking around about. I've read various accounts of this, but I want to be try and be as accurate as possible, but it seems that he had something like about 20 shots of rum, whiskey and cognac and 8 pints of strong German lager.
Well, that would give anyone a heart attack.
Well, it wasn't that. It was in terms of the theme of the boat battle. He then challenged the crew to an arm wrestle. So he took on the crew of HMS Cumberland. Now, Reed once claimed that get this right, think about legendary sessions. His record on a session was 106 pints in 2 days. So, look, the point is here, not that it subsequently cost $3 million to recreate Reed and insert him into the movie.
Yeah, which is really obvious. I mean, I know it was 2000. But
for the time, I don't think for the time it's that bad.
The scene where he gets stabbed and there's a shot of there's a cut and there's a shot of his face and he says was it dust and bones or something? I had to look at the subtitles of what he was saying. That is so clearly from a completely different take. But I think it's so bad.
But we're missing the point here. The point is, in terms of combat, which is the theme you're addressing here, Reed won the arm wrestle. Apparently he won it 5-0. He beat 5 serving 20-something sailors from HMS Cumberland. So the final score was Reed 5, HMS Cumberland 0. Obviously then Reed subsequently died of a massive heart attack. My question being, will CGI Oliver Reed once again appear in Gladiator 2?
I haven't seen him. Sadly, haven't seen him in the trailer. I think his character Void has been filled by Denzel Washington.
He apparently asked Russell Crowe for a fight during filming. Didn't like Russell Crowe at all.
Yes, I read that. I read that Ridley Scott said Oliver Reed dropped down dead after challenging sailors to drinking match whilst filming Gladiator. That was a headline, I think, in the tabloids. But I also read, did you read this? That Michael Winner talked him into doing it. Apparently, Oliver Reed said, I'm not interested. If they ask me to read, I'm a star, and I'm not doing it. I'm not going to read. And Michael Winner said, Oliver, you're not a f***ing star. Go and f***ing read. And if they ask you to do it twice, read twice. That's apparently... so, not all bad from Michael Winner.
Yeah.
Maybe that will bring us on nicely, Bryce, to our questions that we ask of every... film. Yes, I was going to hit you with the stat that Mel Gibson was offered the leading role, but you've beat me to it. And also, our trivial trivia for this episode is that the opening scene, the hand going across the wheat field, that's not Russell Crowe's hand.
Is there a credit for the hand? Is a hand credit
Actually,
there?
it's his stunt double. It's his stunt double's hand.
Yeah. All right, okay.
So, I think I know your answer for this. Who's your favourite character and performance in this movie?
Well, unsurprisingly,
Reed?
it has to be Oliver Reed. I mean, in terms of the myths and the greatness of that very boozy generation of actors. I mean, what a way to go! But that's off. Obviously, that's nothing to do with the movie. But for me, like I say, the mythology is even better than the movie. And I don't really rate the movie, so I'm going to have to say the legend Oliver Reed.
Yes, that's a good point. There are some great. Another one from that era, Richard Harris, who I read would frequently ignore any newly rewritten scenes as he couldn't be bothered to relearn his lines. I thought that was great.
There's a great theme that is starting to emerge on this podcast, which we've addressed with Marlon Brando, of just old actors not giving a toss.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Talking of that acting generation, not a boozy hellraiser like Harrison Reed. Derek Jacobi, of course, it's good to see him in this movie, reprising the toga many years after the seminal Robert Graves' I, Claudius. So that's, again, a good generation there. Yeah.
Born in a toga, isn't he, Derek Jacobi? I also enjoyed stints from Omid Jalili playing, in his own words, the Arabic scumbag character, as usual, as he did at this period. And a guy called Ralph Müller, the German, a bit like a budget Arnold Schwarzenegger. I wonder, the guy who's helping the massive gladiator. There's a bit of banter when he pretends the food's poisoned him. Unfunny German banter.
Yeah, that's it.
I wonder if they try to get Schwarzenegger to do that part. Don't eat that. There's a bomb in there. Don't eat that there. I think probably Joaquin Phoenix gives the best performance in this movie. I know Russell Crowe won the Oscar and Joaquin Phoenix didn't win Best Supporting, but I think his performance is very good. I think he was really young, wasn't he, as well?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that... well, I'd say it was a little bit after his brother River had passed away, wasn't it? He wasn't that well known. Yeah, I think in all seriousness, actually, although I loved the hijinks of Oliver Reed, I think you're right, actually. Phoenix is very good in this.
What about your favourite scene? Were there scenes that you enjoyed, or did you hate the whole movie?
No, I did enjoy some of the scenes. I liked some of the German wars at the start, actually, when we're deep in the forest. I know there's, again, military historians with pedantries about the depiction of catapults and that kind of thing, but nonetheless, I actually really like that opening kind of war scene. The German war scenes I actually really quite enjoy.
Yeah, I thought the scene where Commodus kills Marcus Aurelius, I thought that was very good, very believable scene. One of the better written scenes where he stabs him, and it's actually a good point to note that roughly, it's difficult to know, but roughly 20% of Roman emperors were assassinated, which is an incredible statistic, isn't it? About 8 of them killed by the Praetorian Guard, who were supposed to be defending them, of course. They're just the gatekeepers to power. I don't know my favourite scene. I do like a lot of these scenes. I like the "Are you not entertained?" scene. I mean, it's completely ridiculous and over the top. He comes out and kills about 6 gladiators in 30 seconds.
Don't you find that?
It's great.
But do you not find it gets very tedious after a while?
I didn't. No, I didn't.
I do. I find it terribly tedious.
I watched the director's cut. I think it's a bit longer. I do think that actually it's a little too long. Yeah. This movie.
What, 2 hours 45 or something? Or 2 hours?
Yeah, it could have cut out 20 minutes for me. Personally, I think it's a little bit too long.
Yeah.
So I'll go with that scene where are you not entertained? Who should do the DVD commentary, Bryce? What historical figure? Or maybe we just want Oliver Reed doing it if he could do it from the.
I was going to say, could we just have Oliver Reed? In fact, most of the answers to your questions are just going to be Oliver Reed.
This is exactly what happened during the. What was it, Mutiny on the Bounty, where you answered every question for 5 minutes with Marlon Brando?
I just love these big. I can only describe them as these sort of
big men,
beach whales of the just big men on set. Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? Best companion film. Now, there's a film that I only found out about recently called The Fall of the Roman Empire, made in the mid-60s. Which is basically exactly the same.
I think this was the inspiration for this movie, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, I think so. It basically follows this transfer of power at 180 AD, which is sort of the moment at which the Roman Empire falls into dust, apparently. Yeah. I mean, the other thing, you mentioned the point about the Roman Republic. You've got to remind yourself this is a rigid class system with slavery. No, women are not involved in politics at all. About a quarter of the population are enslaved, so it's not exactly going back to anything to be particularly proud of.
I think that's maybe why... to go back to Roger Ebert, and he said the film lacks joy, and I agree. But that actually, to be fair to Ridley et al., maybe an accuracy. Maybe that's why I dislike this movie, because I think that at heart, actually, ancient Rome, for all its civilizational progress, was at turns an excessively cruel and joyless civilization. Certainly a lot crueler and joyless in my book than ancient Greece, and maybe that's why that carries over. I mean, maybe that's accurate.
Maybe it's the point.
That's why I dislike it. Maybe.
The other companion film, I think the obvious one, is Spartacus, which we should definitely do on this podcast. It's a great movie.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely get around to that. Yeah.
So, how low can you go? Marks out of 10, Bryce. What did you give Gladiator?
Well, if I could, I've already sort of done a bit of Sude's Corner, but I do like when we get to Sude's Corner to quote our favourite source, which is Peter Bradshaw in The Guardian.
Yes.
Peter Bradshaw wrote of this. It is so entertaining and carried off with such dash and chutzpah, it makes you forgive the odd absurdity and wonder where this genre has been all your life.
Yep.
Okay, Peter. He goes on. Where is the traditional homoeroticism? The massive hunks of male flesh on display do not have that deeply bronzed, oiled, chicken-basting look of yore. Calm down, Peter. But to
now you sound like Michael Winner. Actually, Michael Winner's back.
So to just restate the case, I disagree, as I often do, with Peter Bradshaw, and much like Oliver Reed, I think maybe my dislike of this is because I don't much like Russell Crowe, actually. And I just think that there's a confluence here of the air of alcoholic machismo that pervades this movie because of characters like Crowe, because of Harris, because of Reed.
And Ridley Scott, I would imagine, as well.
Yeah, and it comes back to my original point about, being an aftershave commercial. If it was an aftershave, it would have a very musky and masculine scent. Because it's encapsulated in that generation of heavy boozing actors, which I say there's a great mythology and high jinks to them. But let's be really honest, at their core, all of these men have a real sadness and joylessness to their lives. So I'd go back to Roger Ebert in that I find it joyless, this movie. And I do, I wouldn't want to be jumping into bed with the cultural studies critics here, but there is a certain sort of fascistic side to this in its sort of joylessness for me, and for all those reasons, I'm going to give it, I'm afraid, just a 3 out of 10.
Oh my God, I've given it an 8. I think it's ripplingly entertaining, absolutely entertaining popcorn movie. It's not the most cerebral movie perhaps ever made, but I think for bringing back. I'm looking at this in the long view, maybe, of cinema, and the bringing back this genre of films. I'm a big fan of the ancient world, hence the mouse mat, and bringing that back into modern cinema. I'm grateful to Ridley. What have you got for our Hall of Fame, our museum, where we would put anything from the movie, historical or props or otherwise?
Once again, my answer's going to revolve around Oliver Reed. And I just love the story of the fateful drinking bout with HMS Cumberland. So I was thinking maybe we could insert his pint glass or maybe his shot glasses.
His ashes in a pint glass. Maybe that's what we should put in.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I put in there's one point at which there's a gladiator with an absolutely ridiculous Minotaur helmet on. Right. I never really understand that. Put that in. Or that guy's eyebrows at the end. You know, the guy who's doing like the stadium announcements.
Oh, yeah.
Just the most incredible set of eyebrows since Dennis Healy. The Nobel Prize for movie physics. There's a great scene 42 minutes in when he's escaping execution.
Yeah.
And he throws a sword and it goes through the air end over end. And you talk about this movie is kind of like cartoon sometimes. And you just hear whoosh, 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 whoosh. And then the next shot is it's gone through a soldier. Clean through a soldier and he falls off his horse. Great.
Excellent. You do love the physics of the impalings in our historical movies.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it just seems so ridiculous. What would happen in the sequel? Well, do we need to answer that? Because I think in 4 days from when we're recording this, we'll find out what happens in the sequel.
Are you going to go and see the sequel? I can't be arsed.
I think I will. Yeah, I'd like to go to the cinema and watch that. Definitely. I watched the trailer. I wasn't massively convinced by it, and I felt a bit stung by Napoleon. You know, because that's such an epic historical
what's the
theme, as we talked about, and not a very good movie. So,
what's the premise of the sequel? Because look, I would go and see Nick Cave's sequel. That I would go and watch. But what's the? I
don't think they could get funding for that movie.
What's the premise here?
Well, I believe, because it's actually alluded to in this movie, he did actually sleep with what's her name? Lucilla.
Lucilla, yeah.
And they have a son, and it follows the son, because it's not actually in this movie. It's not. I didn't because it's a straight cut. It's not like a crossfade. You know, when they have a kiss, and usually in movies, and when they don't want to show the sex, they do a dissolve. Like a crossfade to show that time has passed, and in this it's just a straight cut.
On the topic of,
I didn't think they did have sex in the movie, but apparently they did.
Oh, I see. Okay, hang on. Can I just really quickly interject? On the topic of Lucilla, will this fact make you revise your very high opinion of this movie? That role was almost given to J-Lo. I mean,
I didn't know that.
Anyway, sorry.
It could have been Mel Gibson and J-Lo. What a movie that would have been.
Yeah. No, that Anyway, sorry. So go on. So I suppose in the sequel you've got their offspring.
Yeah, his offspring. I can't remember his name. It's played by what's his name? Paul Mescal, and he, after 2 decades after the events of Gladiator, he lives with his son and wife. Same thing happens again. Wife and son killed, forced into slavery. Goes to fight as a gladiator, and then there's some political overtones to do with the 2 emperors in. So it looks like a rehash, as we now are fated to suffer in the 2020s. Every old film that is revered now has to be rehashed. But there we go. That's it. Becoming
quite the occurrence. This Gladiator 2 theme there. I don't know if I'm able to divulge a little bit of, I think if I keep it relatively non-specific, gossip in terms of, the role, I believe was, and I have this from my inside sources, was destined to go to Paul Mescal, but it would have been another Irish actor, Barry Keoghan, who was first of all slated for this role, but personal circumstances conspired. So it goes to Mescal. I was having a conversation with someone about this the other day. I don't know if I really rate Mescal as an actor to the same degree. He obviously shot to fame in the BBC adaptation of Normal People, where he's running around with a gold chain on and in his Gaelic football shorts as a sort of sex symbol. Does he pack the same? I don't really like Russell Crowe. Does he? But I can't really. What I'm trying to get at here is I don't know if he packs the punch to occupy that role. If it's going to be a sort of rehash.
Maybe screen presence, isn't it? Because I think Russell Crowe, he won the Oscar for this movie, the original, but it's more about, I think, his presence than anything that he's doing. He has this simmering rage, but controlled, confident, which is very good in Gladiator. I don't know if this fellow will be able to do the same thing. I imagine he'll be required to do the exact same thing. The plot's the same.
The cuts were real, apparently, with Russell Crowe.
I was reading his injury list earlier. It looks like he went through hell. Yeah. Military historians, anything to that we got? I'm sure there are things. I haven't bothered to look them up. I don't think it's the point.
There's a lot of detail about the catapults.
Okay.
But I'm not gonna
onagers, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I can't be arsed really to get into that. But suffice it to say, of course, there's going to be people who have issues there. Again, maybe if you want to get into that level of pedantry, go to a different podcast. We'd rather talk about Oliver Reed taking on HMS Cumberland.
Gladly. And Sude's Corner, Bryce, have you got anything else, or have you used up all of the... What is it? Peter Bradshaw? What's his name?
Peter Bradshaw with his... well, I think, to be fair to PB, he was a bit of tongue-in-cheek there when he was talking about the homoeroticism. But I think I exhausted Sude's Corner with our cultural critics talking of the fascism / Bushism of this movie.
Yeah. Okay, so that's everything. So, Bryce, thanks for joining me. That was good fun. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can at our email address, which is historicalmoviespodcast@gmail.com. There, I did it without a mistake. Yes, thanks very much for listening, and enjoy Gladiator 2, and we'll see you in the next episode.